Chapter 16. Turning back, going forward. Valerius plucked Caden off of the road with his talons. His clawed hand easily fit around Caden's waist and chest with room to spare. He heard a muffled,
"Holy shit!"
as they went airborne. They were not going far, not as the dragon flies, just up to the top of High Reach to his quarters. He was just about to drop the boy lightly down on the balcony when Caden called up to him.
Wait!
Valerius believed the young man was going to argue with him to go back down to the road, but he realized the moment he looked down at Caden that the young man was engrossed with the view.
It's beautiful. The city, spread out against the darkness.
Caden said as he stared down at the many-tiered city in awe. Valerius craned his neck to look as well. It was beautiful. The white gold lights of the city were like nearest stars. There were fires out in the plains as well where people were celebrating the anniversary, and likely the white dragon shifter too. Shimmering curtains of light in the darkness. High Reach was separated from all other cities so their light could not pollute hers. He loved this view with the city ablaze while the forests around were dark and deep.
Will we be able to fly together over this?
Caden asked with a self-conscious laugh.
Fly? With us?
Raziel hissed as if affronted. Is that not what mates do? Fly together, among other things? He pushed Raziel. This mate thing, and the fact that he had not been told about it demanded he continue to make Raziel uncomfortable, even if it made him a little uncomfortable too.
Would you want him to fly with us?
Raziel asked back. Valerius looked down at the young man who was contentedly staring off into the sky. He'd only flown with another dragon shifter during the war, and that was to show the humans' true strength and put terror in their hearts. Esme had flown on his right, and Alarion on his left. What would it be like to have the white dragon gliding beside him? Head held high, eyes half shut as they enjoyed the wind. They could dive and soar and hunt together. And when they came back to High Reach, transforming in the night wind to drop gracefully to the balcony, they would be laughing. I do not know. Valerius lied. The black dragon spirit muttered words he could not hear, words in the ancient tongue that he was one of the rare few to understand.
I swear I could look at this view forever.
Caden murmured. Could you? I thought for sure you would be grousing about how I stopped you from solving things with Marben. And as if he could hear Valerius on some level, Caden's gaze dropped to the crowd of people with Marben at their head below them. Marben was now an indistinct ant from this height, but it was amazing what damage that ant could do. Caden's young body tensed in his hold.
I guess, though, we have business first. Or you do.
Caden said.
Since you stopped me from handling it.
That got him a petulant look.
I could have handled it. I just needed a little more time.
A little more time, and a little more rope to hang yourself, I'm sure. Caden, though, did not appear able to hear him this time. He saw Raziel's head dip, and the spirit's red eyes narrowed. He wondered if the black dragon spirit was blocking this communication for its own purposes. He would have to wait and speak to Caden after dealing with this mess. He lightly dropped Caden onto the balcony. Caden came to the railing and Valerius dropped down so that they were almost eye to eye. The young man shocked him by reaching out and petting his snout. His nose wriggled, and Caden laughed as he continued to pet him.
You're not so scary,
Caden said with a grin.
Oh, don't get that affronted look. You're not that scary to me. I see you, Valerius. You're a softie. You're trying to protect me.
What you do has consequences. That is why you are so innocent, so foolish.
I know Marban is a bad man. I know that he's roped Rose into this and probably a lot of others. His plots and machinations.
Caden said softly and shook his head.
I know he wants power for himself, that he likely doesn't really care for the people he claims to represent, but...
How can there be a but in this?
But he has a point,
Caden said, his expression thoughtful. He then focused on Valerius.
I know you're really annoyed by all of this, and I'm sorry, but could you be gentle with them? They're just excited, even though they should be more thrilled to see you than me."
He lifted one eyebrow. Raziel had ceded control to him completely and cocked his head to the side. "You think I care what they think of me, Caden? Not for my ego, I don't. But for the stability of the realm, I do." But this was beyond communicating through movements. They would talk after he had dealt with Marban, the Faith, and whoever else wanted to make his day. He flipped back, out of touching distance, and pointed into the castle. He wanted Caden to go inside. There would be food. He had not cancelled the order for it. The fire for warmth and quiet. So perhaps Caden could think just how insane his attempts to bargain with Marban were. The old swarm shifter was as cagey as they came. Caden held up his hands, though he did not budge from the railing.
"I'll stay here. Won't try to shift and follow you down or even fuss with the doors. I just want to see what happens, to make sure you don't crisp anybody."
Valerius let his red eyes glow, sending the distinct message that the only crisping would be done to Caden if he didn't stay safe. Then, with a final hard look, he turned and dove down to the road again. The wind whistled around his huge form as he streaked downwards like an arrow in flight. People let out soft cries. Some in the crowd crouched, fearing he would come so low that he would hit them. Those of the Faith were prostrate for multiple reasons. These people would not listen to words. They wanted a spectacle. They wanted a show. He would give them one. He soared up so that he was at the very head of this invading crowd. His chest faced them, his wings flapping at his side, his tail curled into a single loop below them. Now sure he had all of their attention, he threw his head back and breathed a pillar of red-gold fire into the air. The helicopters were keeping a very safe distance. There were more yells and shouts. Then there was silence. He stared at all of them, seemingly meeting each and every one of their gazes before he moved again. There were unlit metal bowls, filled with kindling that were to be lit later that night at midnight to celebrate the anniversary's close. But he would use them now. He flew straight ahead, breathing fire on the bowls as he passed over them, leading all the way back to the mid from the crowd that blocked the road. He then soared back along the other side, lighting the bowls there. By the time he had returned, there were 2 lines of fire leading back to the mid. The bowls leading to the castle remained unlit, so it was clear what he intended for the crowd to do. Go home. At that moment, Shione stepped into the space that he had vacated not that long ago on the bridge, and she transformed into her Sphinx form. It was a remarkable shift. The air went gold all around her like the shifting sands of the Sahara under the noon sun, or gold dust in an ancient tomb. When the golden substance cleared, there stood a Sphinx, 15 feet tall, with the head of an Egyptian pharaoh in full headdress and the body of a lion. She smiled benignly upon all. Yet there was more fear and scuffling at her appearance. In some ways, dragons were more understandable to people in this age and country than a sphinx. She was the true oddity, and people were unsure what she could or would do. The one animal she was similar to, a lion, was not exactly the kindest of creatures. It was a predator, but unlike most shifters, she could talk easily and assured them no matter what her outward appearance showed, she was kind. Her voice was low and melodious, but somehow carried as if coming from a speaker system.
"Good people, you see that it is your king's desire that you return to your homes."
She pointed to Valerius, who hovered above them, very tempted to point back down the road from where they had come. But he kept his peace.
"We know that today has been a day of wonders and that you have many questions. We promise you answer to those and much more. But tonight is a night to celebrate the anniversary. Go back to your families. Go back to your friends and await the fireworks that will come. Tomorrow will bring clarity with the sun."
There were more gasps. and he saw the flash of many phones going off as they took pictures of the rare appearance of the Sphinx shifter. But they all eventually did turn around with no murmurs of protest. Instead, their voices were filled with wonder.
A sphinx! We saw the blessed Sphinx shifter today.
One woman twittered to her companion. Valerius's fire? It was so magnificent. His scales shine in the moonlight. I never thought to see him so up close. Another babbled, already scrolling through his phone's pictures of the evening. He really perhaps should do some photo shoots for people like Shioni suggested, but it seemed disrespectful. He listened, though, for any word about Caden, and he did hear them. The young man. Blonde hair. Very handsome, yes. But who is he? He wasn't dressed like anyone important. A voice that sounded almost horrified by the fact.
He's one of us.
A little boy about 10 in shabby clothes remarked to a man that might be his father.
He was dressed just like me, but he was important, wasn't he?
The father smiled and took his son's hand. I think he was. King Valerius certainly thought so. The boy's forehead furrowed.
But he flew away.
The father's expression darkened. Because of Marbon. Hush, don't say his name. The father said and firmly pulled the son towards the mid. Smart man. Sweet boy. Caden would have loved to have made the boy's day by shifting for him. He would take pictures for hours to everyone's content.
Because the white dragon preens.
Raziel snorted.
Wants everyone to see its pretty scales.
Unable to help himself but to poke the dragon, Valerius said, So you think its scales are pretty? More mumbling in the ancient tongue and black smoke. Chuckling inwardly, he then glanced down to see Marbon and Rose remaining in place for long moments as the rest of the crowd turned and started walking back down the road. Even those who had likely been paid by or were under Marbon's thumb had retreated at the 1-2 punch of his and Shioni's appearances. It wasn't every day when the black dragon lit one's path home, or when the Sphinx shifter ordered one to follow it. Marbon's head lifted to meet his gaze. In those black eyes and gritted jaw, he saw the old humiliations that the ancient swarm shifter had felt he'd endured over the ages. Valerius looked back at him coolly. It was one thing to have a war between the two of them, but quite another to bring an innocent like Caden into it.
When people find our free audio stories on Spotify or YouTube, they often ask, how is something with the high quality of Edward Fox and all those amazing actors still free? Well, the answer is, it isn't. I and my team are supported by memberships. I run my own private website, wraithrain.com. On this website, I've published gay romance, written stories, manga, and now uncensored podcasts since 2010. It's like my own version of Patreon, which I started because at that time, Patreon didn't exist. If you love this podcast and want to support the creation of more like it, consider joining us as a member and getting access to exclusive members-only stories. I'll tell you how to sign up and what you'll get at the end of this chapter.
The young woman, Rose, gently tugged at Marbon's arm, trying to urge him to leave. She looked wretched, guilty for betraying her nascent friendship with Caden evidently, but also not liking to see this failed power play with Valerius either. Finally, Marbon turned and looped his arm through Rose's as they walked back down the road, away from the castle and the seat of power that he wanted to take so badly. Valerius soared in a circle to meet Shioni's gaze. She was watching Marbon and Rose leave as well. Her expression was sad and troubled, but she often felt badly for people who did not deserve it whatsoever. He moved his head towards the crowd behind her. That one was going to be far more difficult to handle than the one that had left. They would demand answers and would not leave until they got them. Caden's family were also looking anxiously up towards his quarters. Whatever they thought he was going to do to Caden was absurd. Surely they could see by now that he wasn't going to attack the boy again. But he and Caden needed time to talk without distractions like parents. Yet he doubted that Shioni would be able to keep them away for long. so he had best take advantage of the time he did have. He gestured with his head for her to go back towards the castle. She nodded in agreement. She loved being in the thick of unpredictable and changing times, despite any protests she might make. This would be a challenge for her. She needed one. He had plenty of challenges himself in talking to Caden next. I need to tell him that he is a mate, and how that changes everything.
The white dragon spirit knows. The white dragon spirit can tell him. We should fly.
Raziel grumbled. Later, perhaps with the white dragon, Valerius teased, but his stomach tightened pleasurably at the thought. Raziel, however, looked askance. I think you doth protest too much, Valerius murmured. He swept back up to his quarters. The 3 helicopters buzzed around the castle for a few moments, waiting to see what else might happen. But there was a no-fly zone around his quarters, so they could not see much. Caden, however, was still standing at the railing looking up at him. He'd clearly seen the whole thing. Valerius transformed just above the balcony and dropped down into a graceful crouch before straightening. Suddenly, his favorite red silk robe was being thrust at him. He blinked.
Here, I thought you would use this. It's cold.
Caden said, eyes firmly fixed on his face, and not his naked body, let alone his cock. Thank you.
No problem.
He took it and slid it on. The silk slid sensuously over his skin. He knotted it in front while Caden looked away until he was finished. Valerius took this moment of being the only one looking to study Caden. He noted that Caden was handsome, in a very fresh-faced American sort of way, but it was his eyes where the true beauty lay. They were luminous and reflected the clarity that Valerius rarely saw. He found himself reaching out and lightly brushing his fingers down the side of Caden's face. Caden turned quickly into the unexpected touch, those eyes wide and a little alarmed like he always seemed to be when Valerius did something he hadn't thought possible. You patted me earlier. I thought I'd get my shot in, Valerius told him in explanation. Caden's face lit up in a grin, and a bubbly laugh left his mouth.
I couldn't help it. You look so cute.
Cute? Valerius pulled a face as if he was truly considering whether he was cute or not. Caden lightly punched his arm.
Oh, come on. Cuteness is in the eye of the beholder. So in other people's eyes, you're a frightening monster, but in mine...
I'm cute. That says something about you, Caden. I'm not sure what it is, but it says something. But then Valerius did flash him a genuine smile. Come, we go inside. It is cold, and I think the lack of food is affecting your thinking.
Food? I thought that they might not bring any up here since you sent me down to the kitchens.
Caden eagerly followed after him. His expression was almost comical when he saw the table empty, except for the fruit from earlier. He was likely starving, and fruit was not going to cut it.
Oh, can we order something, or...
I am often famished at night, and only meat will do. I keep thin cuts of beef up here to grill on the fire. Hold on while I get them, he said over his shoulder as he made his way to the disguised refrigerator that looked like a wooden cabinet. He pulled it open, and there were platters of different cuts of beef, some marinated, others simply plain, and a variety of sauces to dip them into after cooking, from a mustard-based sauce to a horseradish one that burned one's nostrils with the strength of the fresh horseradish. Sit by the fire. We can eat there. But Caden was at his shoulder, taking the platter of beef from his hands, leaving him to simply carry the sauces over to the fire. Caden was making what almost sounded like motorboat sounds. He clearly was wrapped up in the idea of sizzling steak on the fire.
We put the meat directly on the grill, right?
Yes. There are tongs to turn them and take them off. I'll get something for us to eat with. He set the saucers down on the stone slabs that surrounded the fire pit and moved gracefully over to another cabinet where there were plates and silverware. He rarely concerned himself with them, just eating the sizzling steaks hot from the fire, but with a guest, he should be more civilized. Already he heard Caden give an appreciative sound as he laid a steak on the grill, and the sizzle, pop, of beef fat. The glorious smell of cooking meat filled the air almost immediately. He grabbed the dishes and headed back to what was almost a homey scene. Caden had out the pair of tongs and was turning the meat over, hissing a little at the heat of the flames. "The fire cannot hurt you," Valerius told him, "even if you were to stick your hand on the grill grate itself or pick up an ember."
Valerius, don't touch that.
Caden cried as Valerius plucked an ember from the fire up in his hand. Caden lunged to knock it out of Valerius's hand, clearly scared for him. But Valerius moved it out of reach in a lightning-fast move. He held it between his thumb and forefinger. "See? No burning. No smoking, even. Do you want to try?"
No, definitely no. Besides, I'm an ice dragon thing, so wouldn't I get burned?"
Caden asked. "Steaks. I like mine rare," Valerius answered without actually answering his question.
"Oh shit, hold on."
Caden quickly took off several of the rare slices of beef from the grate and put them on a plate for him. "I do not think you would be burned from a little fire like this. Now, my flames would be a different matter, but nothing like this can hurt you." Valerius used his fingers to pick one steak up and dip it into the sauce before devouring it. After he finished chewing, Caden replenished his plate and then filled his own before they both sat down on the couch and proceeded to eat in silence. His gaze kept going to the doors. Caden's parents and friends would be up there any moment. Shioni would only be able to keep them occupied for so long downstairs with the politicians and others trying to speak to them and her.
"What's up?"
Caden asked through a mouthful of meat and mustard sauce.
"This sauce is awesome, by the way. God, I would like to drink it and, well, whatever. Clearly, something is up. What's going on?"
Valerius chewed his last piece of meat carefully. In fact, he may have chewed it 100 times. Caden's eyes narrowed at him, and he knew it was time to say something. He cleared his throat and dabbed his lips with his napkin. Caden threw his napkin at Valerius.
"Cut it out. You're all strangely calm now, but tense as a bow. No longer angry, but if I plucked you, you would twang."
Caden laughed. "I'm not tense."
"Then why are you shouting? You're not tense like you were. I don't know. You look kind of afraid. Not afraid. I mean, you would never be afraid of me, but you look sort of freaked out."
Caden said as he devoured another bite of meat and put several more slices on the fire. "It's nice to eat like this with someone," Valerius blurted out. That hadn't been what he'd meant to say, but it distracted Caden from the conversation that they were not having, but which they needed to have, though he had no idea how to have this conversation. Caden got that deer-in-headlights look that so often crossed his face when Valerian did something, anything that wasn't growling at him. Suddenly that sunny smile was back.
"Yeah, it is. It's really nice."
But then he was back right at the other topic that Valerius wanted him to let go.
"So, what's wrong? Besides the usual that I'm a white dragon shifter in your territory and—"
"Raziel told me something I didn't know." Valerius cut him off. Did he hear footsteps outside? Yes, he did, except there appeared to be only one set hurrying down the hall. He frowned. He fully expected the whole gang, but no, there was one.
"What did it tell you?"
Caden had mustard sauce on his chin, which Valerius wiped off gently with the napkin that had been used as a projectile against him. Caden smiled again and then ducked his head.
"Was it something nice? Or something not nice?"
"It was—" There was a frantic knock on his door. It was Shioni. He knew her knock and her footsteps. He wiped his mouth again and got up to go to the door. He didn't bother checking the tablet and simply unlocked the doors. Her face was flushed. She wore a robe of tawny silk. He stepped aside as she brushed past him in her anxiety. "Shioni, what is it?" he asked. Caden also got up from his seat.
"Yeah, Shioni, what's wrong?" "The dragons. The other dragons. They're coming. News reports show them leaving their territories, and I have messages."
She got out, one of her hands rising to her throat.
"That they are coming here. It must be about the white dragon. I thought we'd have more time and notice." "Oh man, more dragons to be angry with me."
Caden scrubbed a hand behind his head. Valerius winced. It's not just because a new dragon is here. It is what Caden is.
What am I?
Caden's forehead furrowed.
What else is Caden other than the ninth dragon shifter?
Shione clearly couldn't imagine anything else more important than that. Valerius grimaced. He'd wanted to tell Caden this gently, but there was no real way to do that, so he did it bluntly. He is a mate to one of us. I'm betting they're coming to try and win his love.
There is a very important way you can help us out. If you know one person who would truly enjoy this story, send them to the first episode. Since gay romantic audio stories are not exactly mainstream content, it's hard for people to find us in a world where Mr. Beast challenges and true crime podcasts reign over us all. But by recommending us, you can help the story get discovered and help someone in your life find what might be their next fiction addiction. I'll post a link to episode 1 in the notes.